an apology on behalf of Dr. Renosi, who could not be with us this evening due to a personal matter that has arisen. At this point, I'll invite my panelists to join us, and then I'll do a brief introduction before we commence. By way of introduction of this evening's panel, I will follow the normal protocol of ladies first. We have with us Ms. Khanyi Gama, Chair of the Finance and Investment Committee at the KZN Municipal Pension Fund and a board member of SIGFARO, an association of finance practitioners in the municipal space. And then I'll do beauty before age. So we have with us Mr. ABSIP, the CEO of the PIC, who is with us today as well. The PIC being the largest asset manager on the continent. And then last but not least, we have Mr. William Dlangankuta, who is the Deputy Principal Officer of the University of Cape Town Retirement Fund. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us. I think by way of just recapping, what we're trying to do as ABSIP is to craft a blueprint towards the next phase of transformation within the South African financial services sector. I think we have lamented and complained about the slow pace at which transformation has happened in South Africa, and it would not be a complete conversation if we did not then move to pivot towards speaking to those who have experience within the asset owner space or are custodians acting on behalf of the asset owners. And that's what this evening's panel is going to focus on. So I think it's only befitting for us as we start to also then reflect on what has recently been happening in the South African context, where in the past few weeks we have had riots and some level of unrest. And now we found ourselves in a position where we need to be starting the rebuild. So I think my first question then will be directed at Madam Khanyi. I think one of the underlying themes that has been echoed around the riots was that we have in South Africa the most unequal society according to the Gini coefficient, and measurements are similar to that. You are in KZN, and which was one of the places that was most hardest hit. And many have said that pension funds have a significant role to play in terms of driving social upliftment. So maybe my first poignant and direct question to you is, as a pension fund, what do you see your role as in regards to social cohesion and investment in social initiatives?
Thank you, Langa. Good evening, everyone. Indeed, the last few days have been hectic, especially from the KZN side. And we've experienced all these riots in the last couple of days. And really, many of us were impacted one way or the other. And one thing, though, that comes clear or that has been evident is the inequality has been the poor people that have been impacted, mainly on a simple thing such as food. Most people are unable to get access to food. Many people do not have access to a roof over their heads. But maybe to drive the conversation on the municipal pension fund space, which is where I come from, and as the pension fund within eThekwini municipality, I think we've seen how eThekwini has been impacted in the last couple of days. As the KZN pension fund then, on the overall space, working with the city who is also a stakeholder in our pension fund, we're looking at all the socio-economic policies, and the main one that we are getting involved in as the fund is our involvement on the C40 and the climate change processes. And we know that if we can have climate change driven in a different perspective, it will ensure that socially, as the people in this space are able to taken care of and are living in a particular way. And also, we know over the years, really, that our members, as the fund now, are struggling to get access to housing. And we know in KZN, we've got a whole lot of housing shortages. So we are getting involved in that space now to try and make sure that we bring housing, a roof over our members' heads. And what we see is that people do not get to retire comfortably, because as they retire, they go and take whatever they have been saving all these years to try and build a home for their families. And we are saying, why can't we do that while they are still working? And then us as the pension fund, how can we assist to drive the home ownership? Previously, I think for the last couple of years also, we've been part of the pension-backed lending, where people could get access to the money and be able to build homes. But we've seen that that was not enough, because not everyone was able to get into that space. So we are now getting involved and putting together some private equity investments where we can partner with some people who are in the industry, who have been driving these processes, and see how we can get our members to be to participate and own properties. And maybe just before I finish, we've also seen that most of the people are unable to get access to the FLIPS, which is a government assistance program in terms of home ownership. So how can we then get involved and ensure that we are able to assist them? We are able to ensure that they get what is due to them. There's a lot of money sitting in that budget. As we know, over the years, we always hear every year that there's money that has been allocated. But what we don't know is how many people are benefiting from our space. I know that not a lot of people are getting to benefit. Then as the pension fund, we need to drive this change and ensure that our members get the assistance that they deserve.
Thank you very much, Siskan. I think then my second question will be directed at the Honorable CEO of the PIC, Mr. Stoli. I think PIC is the largest asset manager in the continent, sizable investor into the JSE. But if you listen to COSATU, if you listen to the unions, the big thing that they lament is the lack of us moving away from what I like to call the CIS economy, which is the certain infrastructure spend, where all the money that has been historically invested has been spent in certain and creating the richest square mile. While right across the road, we have Alex, which is lagging behind, lacks the infrastructure, has water problems all the time, electricity inadequacy. What measures is the PIC putting in place to ensure that it is investing in socially uplifting projects, whilst at the same time managing and maintaining its imperative to bring capital returns to members?
Good evening, and thanks very much for inviting me. I'm glad I'm part of a conversation, because if I wasn't part of the conversation, I might just come across as if I have the answers, which I must confess I haven't. I think the most important things, of course, is for us to have this kind of conversations, to share ideas and to find ways of doing what is right and doing what needs to be done to address some of the issues that you are raising. I would like to take a step back and start with, I'm in my spare time, I still think I'm a mathematician, and sometimes I still think I'm an academic mathematician. And I always like to say, before you can tackle issues, you need to understand them as much as you can. When we talk about transformation, you need to start with the word itself. Transformation assumes a number of things, and I would like to point out to two. Transformation speaks to a present status that we feel we're not comfortable with, and we want to move to a better status or a different status from the one that we have. Now, what that then forces us to do is to do one thing to start out with, is to understand the current and how we've come to the current. So you need to understand the basis of the status that we currently have, understand it very, very well, and understand how you then need to move to a different or a preferred status. That's quite important, because if you don't do that, then it becomes difficult to answer some of the more pertinent questions that you're asking me. And then again, in terms of first principles, you need to go to first principles and say, so, and I'm now probably kind of moving away and trading on dangerous territory, because I'm no longer a custodian of an asset owner. I'm the guy that looks after the assets. But if you think about what is the pension fund in the first instance, you need to understand it first as an individual vehicle that serves a particular purpose, which I'll come back to, and then think of the pension fund as an individual household vehicle that actually serves a society, a community, or a national interest that addresses certain specific needs that you are asking me to address more specifically. So the first thing that we need to understand is that pension funds have a very important role in their own nature, and that nature needs to be served. And I'm not saying that in looking at addressing some of the issues that we need to address, we're somehow deviating from that. But it's important to remember that when pension funds serve their purpose, that purpose in itself addresses the issues that we need to address. Pension funds are an accumulation of people's contributions while they are working. Those contributions then become available to them when they are no longer able to work, to actually do the things that are very, very important to serve the purpose of pensions, which is consumption. So they, in a sense, drive the economies. First, you accumulate, and once you've accumulated, they can actually serve your purpose. That purpose is very, very important, because we mustn't trade off the short-term needs that we have, which are very, very important, at the expense of the long-term ones, which people sometimes don't realize that actually, yes, you need certain things now, which you can provide for with your current ability to earn an income, but there will come a time when you need to provide for that when you're no longer able to earn an income. And that becomes important for you as an individual, but it's also very important for your household, your community, and society at large. And that is in itself a very important purpose that needs to be served by pension funds. Then there's the broader one of saying, well, once you've done that, of course, you're accumulating these assets and you need to use them, yes, for the benefit of your future needs, but for what is required now, which then speaks to your question that you're asking me. So how do we address the current needs of individuals themselves and society much more broadly, especially with regards to the kind of challenges that we as a country have experienced recently in terms of unrest, and how our pension funds can contribute to stemming that. And I'm emphasizing contributing, because I don't think the pension funds necessarily can have the solution to the broader problems all by themselves. Then, having spoken to that, and I think now it's speaking as an asset manager, is that once the assets have been accumulated, they need to be invested, and that becomes quite important. Now, investing, of course, is what pension funds can do to serve the purposes that are important to the individuals themselves and to society at large. And the decisions that we make in terms of how we invest, where we invest, becomes very, very important in their own right. Having said that, I'd like to also state that we must also understand that already pension funds do that anyway. They invest, of course, indirectly in listed instruments in the markets. You can then argue about how those investments are translated into the real needs of people. And I'll quickly point out to you that that money goes to companies that provide employment, provide products and services, pay taxes. So already they actually are playing an important role, or they're investing on the fixed income side, largely in government to begin with, and of course also in corporate South Africa, which also borrows money from pension funds and other agglomerations of assets. So already you mustn't treat pension funds as if they're not playing a role, because they are, both in the listed space and in the fixed income space. But of course, there that is only part of the economy. The economy is not what is listed. The bigger part of the economy actually is in this environment which is not listed. And that is where pension funds actually now play a direct role in terms of supporting, hopefully, entrepreneurs that are providing products and services in the unlisted space, which of course does the same thing: employ people, provide products and services, pay taxes, but much more directly to the people that are actually involved. And that's the role that I think pension funds can play. So the most kind of broad term for that is to have an allocation of their assets that are specifically focused on the unlisted environment, provided, of course, on the other side, the entrepreneurs are running those entities in a manner that fulfills those obligations in terms of providing services directly to the people, providing products directly to the people, employing directly in communities, which then serves the purpose. I think at a broader level, I would like to stop at that, and then we'll come back to the detail, and I don't want to kind of hog the conversation. Thanks.
Okay, so maybe if I can ask a follow-on question. Regulation 28 proposed amendments are seeking to encourage a movement towards an increased allocation towards investment in infrastructure and their projects that have been earmarked by the presidency that speak to that. And I think looking into the investment universe, there's been an emergence of new managers who are looking to invest in the infrastructure space. But a lot of them have clustered apparently into the energy space with reason or with cause. What are your views on the proposed amendments towards Regulation 28? And I think this is a question that I want to pose to everybody. So after you, Mr. Stone, maybe we can go to Siskanye and then to William before I ask him his first question.
So again, I'm going to use the same trend. Start with the current status and look at where you want to go. We mustn't assume that currently pension funds are not investing in infrastructure. So, because I think if you think about it, the challenge sometimes is less about where the money is. So let's start with the Regulation 28. Currently, you can actually invest in terms of the current Regulation 28 up to 5% in the unlisted space. Now, if you were to look at pension funds and say, how many pension funds have actually listed that have invested the full 5% in the unlisted space, you are likely to find that very, very few. So we talk as if the current allocation has been used up, which actually is not the case. The challenge that pension funds are finding is that while they are willing to invest in the unlisted space, especially in things like infrastructure, they haven't been able to do so because the opportunities, if you want to be honest, are not there. And that's probably more the challenge. So that's the first thing. The second part is that we need to define what infrastructure is, because sometimes we think as a country we lack infrastructure. Sometimes we don't. So if you think about infrastructure, so you will think about transportation. You say, is the problem that we don't have a rail network system in South Africa? The answer will probably say, actually we do. It may well be that we're not using it effectively and efficiently. You say, don't we have roads? Well, you say, well, we could have many and more and better, but actually we do. So is that the problem? You say water. Is it because we don't have the ability to invest in water? And the answer is probably we can. So what is the problem? The problem is if we say we want more infrastructure, what kind of infrastructure? Do we need another Transnet, or do we need to be running Transnet better? Because pension funds and the PIC and our clients are already investing in Transnet. So if somebody were to come in, let's build another how train, I'm using that as an example, you probably find that pension funds will happily invest in that. The same thing goes for power, for any infrastructure that you want, for water, for sanitation. Sometimes the problem is not that pension funds don't want to invest in those, is that the bankable business ideas and the implementation of those are actually not there. So maybe we need to focus and say, well, government must come up with a project and say, we want to build, I'm using an example, high-speed train between Gauteng and eThekwini, or a high-speed train between Gauteng and Cape Town, and that's a new infrastructure that we need to build. And this is how we are going to monetize that to ensure that pension funds, when they invest, they can get a return from it. then I can tell you pension funds will actually invest. So sometimes I think we're looking at the wrong side of the equation. You're saying the problem is that funds are not being provided. I say, well, I think the problem is that the ideas are not being provided. If we say there's a problem of water in South Africa, where are we building the next dam, which we will actually allow pension funds to invest in and ensure them that they will get their money back either from the capital that they've invested when people repay that. So I think we need to be careful that we understand when we talk about we need to invest in infrastructure and pension funds are not investing, what do we mean? I would argue that pension funds are probably willing to invest in infrastructure, but the infrastructure must be provided and say, this is the infrastructure that we want to build. Please, can you give us the money to do so? And this is how we're going to repay you over a period of time. Thanks.
Sis Kanye?
I couldn't agree more with Ujobe because yes, Regulation 28, the amendments are there and we're looking at increasing the allocation. However, is the money that we are investing going to give us returns? Because we must remember, as much as we would like and everyone wants to invest everywhere, the main priority that is important for us is the well-being of our members. Are those projects bankable? Are they going to give us the returns that will ensure, just to borrow from what I said previously, that our members are going to retire comfortably? We wouldn't want, as a pension fund, to go and invest where all the money will be lost. However, we are waiting. Let's see what bankable projects are out there, bankable projects that are going to give us returns, not just the benchmark, not just any return, but benchmark beating returns. And then we can be able to take it forward and make sure that we invest. And we are really excited with the infrastructure issue. And there has been the allocation that we have 5%. We've got a little bit of investment in that space, but it's not enough. We can still do more. However, it needs to make sense and it needs to make business sense. It must make investment sense for all of us. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Maybe let me twist the question a little bit before it comes to William. As a fund that has a younger demographic, how are you viewing the change to Regulation 28? And does that bode well for in creating the society that members of your fund would be looking to live in before they even consider retiring into?
So that is an interesting one, Langa, because in my previous statement, I indicated that we are looking at the housing projects, and those housing projects that we are looking into, all the infrastructure must be laid down as well. So it must be in a space where people are going to be able to live and they are going to be comfortable. And we are not looking at them only staying for the here and now. It must be for future and also for their generations. So it becomes important that the infrastructure is safe and it is durable, if I can put it that way. So we are looking into those aspects.
Okay. William, your view on that question?
Yeah, I thought you were referring to our fund when you're talking about younger members, being that I'm the last one to go and I'm the youngest. So clearly, I thought it was maybe because of asset AUM, but it's most probably an age issue. But thanks for having us, Deputy Press. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what is being said always boils down to ESG principles, you know. Sis Kanye refers to housing and ensuring that we retire in an environment that's conducive for future generations. So if you can have all these innovative ideas and say, well, let's invest in infrastructure, we can increase the allocation in terms of from a 5% to a 10%. But if boards of trustees don't have the skill set and there are no opportunities available, then they're not going to invest in an asset trust that they don't understand. So first and foremost, going back to Ubab Jobe's remarks that, you know, there needs to be something that we can allocate to, and it's something that needs to be sustainable, and it's something that we need to ensure that everybody benefits from it. You look at the the recent things that have recently happened in terms of KZN, the looting, and it shows, but this happened prior. I mean, you look at when COVID started, you can see the inequalities within our society that became very evident, and you can see that, you know, corruption is rife. So all these things, they boil down to ESG issues. So if we have to basically want to invest in this particular asset classes, we need to ensure that the governance is proper, things are properly run. We don't want to give people money and then the next day they are shipping off to Dubai, for lack of a better example. So for me as a younger member with young kids, I always advocate that we need to be very innovative in each and everything that we are doing. We need to be very sustainable, you know, because it's well and good if we go into an equity market that's very aggressive, but if we are killing our environment in the process, then, you know, there's not going to be a world to retire in. So ESG principles are very important in each and every investment decision-making process that we get ourselves into. So that's my stance, and as a younger member, as I said earlier on.
Okay. And then maybe a follow-on question for you would be, now we've lived through COVID, right? We who are over 35 have been vaccinated. And we are about to go out, leaving the younger ones indoors to babysit themselves. On that note, how has investing for pension funds started to shift in light of COVID? And what has the impact been in terms of how you have positioned your investment policy statement, and what are some of the considerations that this has brought into the investment thesis? And I think this is a question that I will again then go in reverse order, William Siskanye, and then our honorable CEO.
Yeah, I mean, realize that there are a lot of uncertainties, you know. You could be planning strategies, you know, you could be saying that, you know, these are the kind of asset classes that we should be focusing on. But when COVID happened, equity markets did take a hit, and we saw that, you know, traditional asset classes aren't very viable, you know, especially when there's financial turmoil caused by a disease. And you needed to basically review your investment policy and say, we need to diversify more. You can't have over-reliance on one particular asset class. And you also can't just escape the turmoil by just going offshore as well, you know, because they also have a ripple effect. They were affected by the same thing. It was a global pandemic. And, you know, we've been working very hard we've got a stretch session, in fact, coming up in the next couple of days, whereby we're going to iron out our IPS and ensure that we kind of like preempt the unforeseeable and take into account that, you know, we need to diversify more and look at where we are currently. Is it viable, you know? And I know that our investment consultant, SNA, have been very actively involved in ensuring that we review our IPS and reviewing where we are as a fund and where we could be, which is very inclusive as well, you know, looking at our Black managers that we have and looking at future possible unlisted and alternative space, which is a space that we haven't really tapped into, but it's very appealing. And so, yeah, that's what we've learned. And it was a rude awakening, but I think it had to happen so that we can also be very proactive going forward instead of being reactive.
Okay. Siskanye, your views?
So with the outbreak of COVID last year, everybody, we saw we saw dips in our market, and really it meant we need to look at alternatives, because we know that people who retired last year in the midst of COVID had lost a chunk of their savings, most of the savings that they had for their life. So we've also, as William is saying, we're looking at diversifying and also ensuring that we are not looking we must have classes that complement each other, so that we are able to still gain from the market, irrespective of where or what is happening worldwide. And what also we saw as a win last year, if I may touch on, we looked at some of the hedging opportunities that were available, and we managed to make a bit of inputs in that space. However, there's still a lot way to go. We still need to relook at our investment policy and make sure that we diversify as much as we can to make sure that we are safeguarded in the future.
Thank you, Mrs. Kanye. Mr. Stole?
Chair, thanks very much. I think before, you asked an earlier question, which I would like to go back to before I deal with the challenge of COVID. I think it had to do with infrastructure and its attractiveness to a younger pension member profile. I think what you were asking is quite fundamental, because when we talk about investing in infrastructure, one of the things that make infrastructure very appealing to pension funds is that it allows for a match of the liability. Of course, you normally think about a match being appropriate at a younger age, but actually it is just as appropriate at an older age, because yes, for younger people, they have a longer time horizon to invest, and infrastructure lends itself to that, in a sense that it is the kind of investments that has a long payoff if, of course, it's managed appropriately. And that's the one that we normally talk about. But we also forget that even at retirement, if somebody retires and they are retiring in good health, normally your life after you retire is anywhere between 20 and 30 years in most instances. It might sound like, Abel, what are you smoking? But that's actually the reality. So even when you retire, your time horizon in terms of when you actually need to have any income that's generated from your pension assets, it's anywhere between 7 years to very easily 20, 25 years. So your infrastructure, to the extent that it is viable and bankable, actually gives you a good match in terms of giving you a nice, steady, sure security of both your capital and your income over a long period of time. And for that reason, I think the focus on infrastructure is very, very good. And when I actually emphasize the need for there to be opportunities for pension funds to invest in infrastructure, that is the basis of it, because it is a very good liability match for the nature of the kind of assets that pension funds are, in the one hand. And of course, when you're investing in infrastructure, it then provides the services to members, or you can say broadly to the community, which is very, very important. Whether you're talking logistics via transportation, both rail, road, or flight in terms of ports, or you're talking in terms of other infrastructure, be that sanitation, water, and so on. And the benefit that the community and the members derive from that, and we can actually include housing in that, it becomes very, very important. So I didn't want to kind of lose the importance of infrastructure as a good match for long-term liabilities, and why it actually is almost a natural asset that pension funds should be looking at in terms of investing in the long term. And they have done so, be it through government or through state-owned enterprises, some of which have not covered themselves in glory. So I just wanted to go back to that, because I think it's a very, very important question that needs to be understood, that there is a natural fit between infrastructure as an investment and pension funds as investors in infrastructure. So that's the taking you back part. Then dealing with COVID, if you go back to where we were in March in 2020, in South Africa, of course, we had a double whammy, but of course, the first thing that we had was the World Health Organization declaring a pandemic, and the impact of that was global, not just South African. I mean, the market responded viciously with downgrades in prices of up to 30%. Ours was accentuated because at the same time, a couple of days later, we were downgraded to sub-investment grade, and then that worsened the situation. What then happened, of course, was a sharp recovery, like what we talk about, the V-shaped recovery. Then you need to say why that happened to be able to understand the impact on pension funds and how we need to be responding to investing in a post-COVID environment. The first thing, of course, that what contributed to the V-shaped recovery was something that we in South Africa have, but not to the same extent as you will have globally. So you say, what drove the significant recovery? For instance, currently we're having this meeting virtually. So the technology companies that have made this ability for us to work differently have benefited. So your technology companies, whether you're talking about your Zooms, which we are using, or your Microsoft Teams, and the technology that support that infrastructure have driven the recovery. The next thing, of course, was the money pumped into finding vaccines, and of course, the discovery of vaccines and the money that's going into the productions of vaccines. So the pharmaceutical companies have driven the recovery. And then, of course, the other beneficiaries of that is what I call virtual shopping or virtual entertainment. So all the industries that are in that space, which in South Africa we don't have too many of, but have benefited from because of our exposure, the exposure of our companies, especially in the listed space, to those to the environment outside of South Africa, has driven the recovery. Now, for a South African pension fund, one of the questions that we need to ask ourselves is, well, can we fundamentally benefit from that, given that we are not necessarily the creators or the maintainers of that infrastructure, technology, pharmaceuticals, or the retail, virtual retail and virtual entertainment. And if you're going to benefit, are our people, our entrepreneurs, creating the same kind of platforms to be able to benefit from those? Because if the answer is not, what we're going to find is that the kind of recovery that we've seen is not supported by the fundamentals that will support pension funds and investments in going forward. And that then puts risk as to whether our current recovery is sustainable going forward. Then structurally, what you then ask, you say, so what has been the experience in South Africa? And what we've seen, and I'm now talking from the PIC, and I'm sure it's the same experience that everybody has had, is that we know that COVID is impacting certain industries directly, or certain areas of investing or asset classes directly. For instance, the retail or let's say property space, or retail, the real estate environment. So to what extent will COVID impact how we work going into the future? Currently, most people are not working in offices, they're working virtually. Will that be a permanent situation? Or if it improves, would it improve to the same degree where we were before the pandemic struck? And the chances are, the answer is, we probably will have some going back to office, but it will not necessarily go to the same level as we've had. The same goes for instance, for retail, for entertainment. We will still go to entertainment spaces. So, for instance, property as an asset class going into the future becomes a very challenging asset class to consider. I'm not saying it won't continue, because I'm sure there will be a recovery, but it's not likely to be at the same level as what it has been in the past. That then will force pension funds to find alternatives. And that's where things like infrastructure becomes quite attractive as an area where we need to find opportunity, because we know that, for instance, this asset class will not be suitable going into the future, or not suitable to the same extent that it was in the past. And therefore, we'll need other things to invest in. And infrastructure poses itself as an attractive avenue of investment going forward. So my sense is that COVID is going to change the investment space quite significantly. And the first area that's going to change is the pension funds' strategic asset allocation, especially to areas that are currently involved in things that are, for instance, as an example, retail will be affected. So will shopping continue to be the way it has been done before? And how will that actually affect the retail companies going forward? And will that still be an area of investment for pension funds and all investors into the future? And my answer will be no. And if the answer is no, so it becomes, where else are we going to invest? And we need to find those alternatives, and find those alternatives that not only serve the purpose of pension funds, but address some of the issues that both Kanye and and William have actually stated, to say that we also need to make sure that those alternatives serve the purpose of our members while they are still working, not when they're only waiting when they're going to retire, and also society at large. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. May I remind panelists that please can you post your questions in the Q&A tab, and then later on in the session we'll pose those to the panelists. Thank you. I think let us then go a little deeper and now start to talk in more in-depth around pension funds and pension funds championing transformation. I think we've heard a lot about how the rate of transformation in South Africa has been slow, how asset managers in South Africa who are Black manage less than 10% of the assets in the investment universe. And then we've also heard how South Africa has less than 5% of its assets sitting with, in fact, less than 5% of the Black asset managers are female. So now there's an impetus on the pension funds to help us transform the economy, to help us transform the financial services sector. And I would like to know, maybe let's start with Siskanye and then go to William before we go to Ubabu Chove, to understand what are your specific pension funds doing? And I think let me be even more direct and say, what are you doing to drive transformation, and what are you doing to ensure that there is beyond just transformation from a racial perspective, gender parity and investment into women-owned firms? And what policies are you putting in place within the pension fund to ensure that these gains that we make step by step are entrenched and are not easily reversed should there be a change in the leadership of the institutions? I'll start with you, Siskanye.
Thanks, Langa. It is true, really, that the issues of transformation have been delayed in the investment space. It's been too long, and we know really the various reasons why some have not been picking up in a pace where it should have been picking up. Nevertheless, we are here now, and what is important for us is to make sure that we do what is right. As the KZN Municipal Pension Fund, we do have our transformation policy, which we have adopted, and it is specific. And our transformation policy speaks directly to our investment policy statement. And we've decided that we are going to ensure that we put targets in place. So when we had our strategy session in the last few months, we decided to put strategies and put targets for us to meet transformation. We've also went and defined what do we mean as transformation and how do we think we are going to achieve it. And I think that having that clear direction is assisting us to be able then to drive transformation in a way that it should be driven. We did not want to just say that we are looking at transformation, because if we don't set the clear targets, next year we'll still be at the same spot where we are right now. So going forward, as I'm saying, with all these processes that we are putting in place, we are hopeful to achieve as much as possible within the next few years, and as we've set targets. And also our transformation really is not only looking at the asset management side, we're also looking at our service providers that we deal with. Who are the service providers and what value are they giving? We're also looking at those people who are going through the incubation, because if we do not assist and support those service providers or those organizations, they will never be in a position to compete with people who've been in the industry for a very long time. And we know that because over the years, the Black service providers or the Black asset managers have not had that opportunity. So we need to make sure that we are in a space where we invest And also we give the targets, and we are saying to them, we don't want to do lip service. And I think by us setting these targets and ensuring that we look at the deliverables that we are looking at, they must talk directly to our strategies that we are willing or that we are looking to achieve as the fund.
Okay. Dlanga?
No, I fully agree with Mamkani's approach. We also had it's been a 3-year journey. And I mean, we had a board strategy session where we met and we measured our service providers and said, what are our critical success factors? And each committee was given, a task and said, well, as the investment committee, you need to look at the BEE in terms of transformation of our asset managers. You need to look at ESG. And then what happened subsequent to the strategy session in early last year, we conducted a member survey. So we had an ESG survey and members came out and, because when we have to sit and basically draft our IPS or review our IPS, we need to know what our members want us to do. So we needed them to give us their input. So we did a survey, and the survey results, when they came, members were concerned about corruption, inequality, and climate change. And I mean, this spoke to when we have to draft our IPS. Fast forward, we had an ESG workshop. So we sat with our investment consultant at the time, and we went through and said, well, as part of the IPS, we want member and shareholder activism, and we want to hold our managers and underlying firms accountable. So we are very vocal in terms of proxy voting. You should see our MS teams for our investment committee is very active with all these proxy votings that are coming through. We had a BEE workshop. So where we set our transformation goal, because this speaks to the FSTC reporting that we have to do as a fund. So we have to do the granular and engage our managers at our annual report backs. So we want to hold our managers accountable. So if I'm looking at, or any of the trustees is looking at a report back and they're looking at the demographics of a firm and comparing it to last year, we need to see that there's an improvement within the firm. And if we're not seeing those improvements, then we have to be very confrontational with our managers. It's not just about level 1 BEE anymore, because it seems like anyone can go to Marabastad and get a certificate with level 1. So we need to be actively engaging with our managers and saying, what are you doing? How are you growing your own timber? What's the succession planning for Black professionals within the firm? What are you doing for disabled staff members? Do you have any disabled staff members? What are you doing for like portfolio managers? How many women portfolio managers do you have, regardless of race? So it's very confrontational. And, it gets heated when you have to speak to that slide, when there's report backs, especially for managers that are traditionally white, your GLE managers, and that have a level 3 certificate and trying to get an empowerment deal coming through so that they can get a level 1. So that's where we are. And I think that we've made great progress in terms of this. We're having another strategy session. So we reviewed our IPS last year. Our IPS is going to speak to our transformation policy, is going to speak to our ESG policy. And each and every one of those E, S, and Gs have an individual definition as per the board, So we're not just taking what the UN PRI, but we're applying the principles onto how we can practically impose ourselves with our assets to our managers and as well as the underlying asset classes that we're invested in. So we are very proactive. So it's very exciting. It took a while. Sometimes you have to wait for certain people to retire in order to have impact. So yeah, we're grateful that we had to wait, and we're very impactful. And I see Kolisa Dlamini is here. So he's been very influential in this process.
Okay. Thank you, Zata. Wabu Jobe, maybe let me turn the question a bit as it comes to you. It's always obvious and always stated in every forum where the PIC or GEPF are present that the extent of your influence is even more profound. So as William said, there's something that I think we'll now call the Maravastad phenomena, where what you get is an entity that has a 10% Black ownership, and they manage to reach a level 1. Yet when you look at it, we still have what we coined the other time, the cappuccino effect, where it's Black at the bottom, it's white in the middle with a little sprinkling of Black. How far are you going beyond just the certification to ensure that what you are considering transformed managers are actually transformed, and that you are supporting people who are going to champion and drive transformation also into their own value chains?
Chair, thanks very much for that. Transformation is, it's imperative. Transformation is also very broad and very wide. So, I'm going to try and talk to the different aspects of it, and I hope it doesn't take too long. But let me start. I was going to start elsewhere, but let me start where you want me to start at, and that is that. So, from a PIC perspective, if you're thinking about PIC as a custodian of the assets of the pension fund, the GPF, the UIF, and the compensation fund, and some smaller clients, and you're saying, okay, so the first thing that we have is to support Black entrepreneurship, and starting with Black entrepreneurship in the asset management space, where we can almost directly impact on. I'm sure that you know that currently the PIC pretty much accounts for anywhere close to about 50% of all the assets that are being managed by Black asset managers generally. So currently, you could say, given the size of the PIC, maybe that's still not enough, and we can have that conversation, and it will be a fair conversation to have. But we need to start with the acknowledgement that if you start out with the fact that for almost 50% of the assets that Black asset managers are managing comes from the PIC and the GPF and its clients, you would have to acknowledge that we are already playing a significant role. And of course, we still have the scope and the ability to play a much bigger role. And that's both the intention of the PIC and its clients. So that intention hasn't changed, and it continues to be the case. And it's something that we will continue to want to see a significant increase as far as that is concerned. So I think that's important to put forward, to say that we are already a significant supporter of Black asset managers currently and into the future. And we also are a big significant supporter of asset managers run mostly by women. There are not too many of them, but to the extent that they are, we actually do so. We have an incubation project that has been running for a number of years, with successes and failures, because it's not only a one-dimensional issue. It's not only about what do pension funds do or don't do. It's also on the other side, when people are given the opportunities, do they make a success of it? So that's also important. The other thing I think that's also important in terms of the extent to which the PIC or pension funds generally can support participants in the asset management space is the extent to which they differentiate themselves. So not only how do they perform, but do they offer something different? Because to the extent that they don't offer something different, it becomes very difficult to justify why them, other than the fact that they are Black, which is in itself a good reason to support them, but it can't just be the only reason. So I think that again speaks to the need for us, and now it's a challenge to us as Black people to say we need to be entrepreneurial and be offering something different from what the current proverbial. There was an earlier question that one of the participants or audience asked about to what extent are pension funds comfortable to look at alternatives? And that's a very good question, because it also speaks to alternatives in the traditional sense, but to what extent are we creating alternatives? So what extent are we doing something different as Black asset managers? or are we simply doing the same as everybody else and expecting to be treated differently? That's quite important. So I think that is important, but I know that from our perspective, that's a mandate that we have from our client, and that's a mandate that we have from the PIC itself. And of course, if you follow the PIC closely, you know that there's an amendment act that also encourages us to do more of the same. So we have a mandate to do more. So the challenge is to find those managers that are offering something more, and of course performing, because sometimes the setting that we find ourselves having to do is where we have to withdraw mandates because people have not performed into the future. So that's on the asset management side, but transformation goes beyond that. Sometimes correctly, when we focus on supporting Black new initiatives, and they should be supported at all times, we forget that, go back to where I started, what is the status quo? Yes, we can wish and aspire to change the future in terms of new Black players, but actually there is a bigger opportunity to transform the existing white players, whether they are asset managers or companies in general, because if they themselves are not changing. So if we say company X, which has traditionally been a white company, we will simply walk away from you. We will not be seeking for you to transform. It's going to take us a long time to transform. So one of the biggest focuses that we need to focus on is to transform the current big, traditionally, if you want to call them white, call them traditional managers. They themselves need to be transformed. And transformation will probably happen quicker if they themselves employ more Black professionals and progress those Black professionals within the organization. If they were to actually do that, you probably find that the pool of Black expertise in this environment will actually grow much quicker. So yes, we must look at supporting the Black emerging players, but actually we must be driving transformation even at the existing companies, because they have the capacity to even engender more transformation than anywhere else. So that's the one dimension. Then there's a broader one, is one where there needs to be transformation in the entities in which we invest, because we're talking about the conduits of the money. We're not talking about the people on the other side. So transformation also needs to be happening at the entities in which we invest. And that is about making sure that we have the appropriate boards sitting in those entities, and making sure that those boards themselves actually drive transformation. Because one of the things that we find is that we actually will push to have, say, for instance, Black people or women being appointed to boards, but when they get there, they don't themselves champion the interests of transformation. And making sure that all of us take ownership wherever we are in terms of driving the transformation that necessarily becomes very, very important. Yes, for the GPF, for the PIC, for the UIF, because we are the assets, we can actually do that by directing the assets to Black people. But once that has happened, whether they are Black asset managers, they need to drive transformation within their organizations and within the investing companies. Whether it's us dealing with the traditional asset managers, they must be driving transformation within those organizations, and more important, at the investee company, so that it is not only focused about creating asset managers, but across the board. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so I think that is a great segue into my next set of questions. So one of the indictments that has been given to the pension fund industry in South Africa is that we do have a propensity as a country to write great policy, to say we are going to transform, to come up with a transformation charter, but in the authoring of our policy, we are very apologetic. We understand that we are so many years from 1994 and we have not seen the change. And yet, when the carrot has not worked, we are not ready to apply the stick. I think one of the questions that is in the chat box says, is speaking to how, for example, they are saying, as the PIC, play a significant role in terms of driving this, but since the party commission, there may have been a little bit of a lethargy in terms of the extent and the pace at which you were moving to influence this. But let me broaden that question and say, all these firms, they are getting it right, for example, on a scorecard basis, but we still complain about how the transformation is still that cappuccino effect, and we're not seeing that coming through And we're not seeing the pension funds penalize them for that. Instead, we continue to have the discourse around when will it happen, if it does happen, maybe it will happen, and yet the status quo remains. So my direct and pointed question to each and every one of our panelists, maybe we'll start with Siskhanyi and then Mr. Stolle and then William last, is what are you doing to make those companies change? Because ultimately we, the citizens, we are tired of the status quo remaining, and we are looking to you as the ultimate bearers of power by having the economic muscle to change the status quo.
Thanks, Langa. It is true that we can't run away from the big players that are there in the market. And we need to make sure that they toe the line as well in ensuring that they drive transformation. I think William did touch. We do have our due diligence with all our service providers that we work with. And one of the items that is always on that agenda is show us how are you taking care of your workforce, and more especially the Black workforce, because that's where we want to see that you are giving them the skill that they require, the skill that they can use, and also maybe ultimately join another asset company outside and have a bigger Black asset company. But what we see is organizations will be graduates, and we ask when we go back the following year, you had graduates in this space, where are they? Why having to absorb them? Because they need to come back and be the ones that are driving the process, that are driving that investment investment decisions that we want to see. Maybe just to flip the coin on the other side, we also see that within the Black asset management space as well, everyone, instead of us jointly working together and build an asset company that is going to have a muscle, that is going to compete with the bigger organizations there, everyone, they want to open their smaller companies and compete against each other. Can't we have a consolidation, a big consortium that is going to give the other organizations a run for their money? But we see that in the space outside, we still have those dimensions where the Black professionals, if I can put it that way, are not given how do I put it? Are not given the chances that they deserve, or are not given the opportunities to do what they can do. And we know with many of them that we've interacted with in our space, or the people that we invest with, that we interact with on many occasions, that work can be done. However, how are we then working together as Black asset companies? Yes, we do need to compete. You do need to compete. Why am I putting myself in this mix? You do need to compete against each other, but how are you working together to ensure that you give the bigger white, traditionally white organization a run for their money? And that is still not evident out there. It's still not evident. Thanks, Lan.
Chair, must I go? I think you're muted. You're muted, Chair. Okay, thanks. I think first and I know it's kind of an aside that you made around the PIC and the Party Commission and how that has impacted how the PIC is doing what it's doing. I just want to point out that I think that it is a fact that, of course, that the PIC went through a investigation and interrogation. It wasn't easy. It was a difficult process. It was found wanting in in certain aspects. And it is true that we are spending time, of course, trying to address those aspects. But it is not true that that has prevented us from continuing to do what we believe is right. I think the process that we are following are robust, and we're wanting to make it even more so, simply because of the kind of difficult experiences that we've had, both in terms of investing in the unlisted environment and not so much, I think, in terms of supporting Black asset managers. I think some have not succeeded in our processes, and we've had to take some difficult decisions. But our support for Black asset managers continues, and we continue to deploy asset managers to Black asset managers as and when the opportunity presents itself, and the appropriate skills that fit the kind of mandates that we have from clients dictate. So I don't want to have people leave with the impression that the Empathy Commission has somehow prevented the PIC to continue to do what it has been doing, and it continues to do that. Maybe when we're not shouting out too much about it because we're busy fixing ourselves before we try to fix other people. But I just want to confirm that we are continuing to do so. And then to go back to the more specific question. So what are we doing to engender change? And the obvious one, as I've already indicated, is the commitment to supporting Black asset managers in the first instance, to supporting Black entrepreneurs to the extent that they come to us with bankable projects. That hasn't stopped. I think we're continuing to do so. The processes may be slower in a sense that we are now taking much more care. We know, of course, that not all of our decisions are going to be correct, not because people are failing to do what they want to do, but because circumstances changes. But we want to make sure that when we make decisions, we're supporting people that we can stand by even when times are difficult, and to see them through challenges that they might actually have, because we will be able to stand up and be able to defend the decision that we've taken. And that continues in terms of supporting Black entrepreneurs, both in the asset management space and in companies that are being set up in the unlisted environment. Then on the traditional side, what we are doing, and we're doing that quite significantly, we engage with companies, be they the traditional ones or the Black ones. We don't just pull the gun either to shoot those who are not misbehaving or those who are failing, but we engage quite heavily with asset managers, with investee companies, to drive transformation specifically. And as William has spoken, the other dimension, of course, is not just transformation, but also the whole issue around ESG, because ESG, to some extent, if it's done properly, will serve the needs of transformation as well. If we talk about how we're treating the environment broadly, dealing with issues of climate change and how that's going to impact investment and the assets that we are looking after now and into the future, that's quite important. And to focus more specifically on the two other dimensions, the one being governance. I think, Chair, you spoke about governance at the beginning as an aspect that needs to be focused on to ensure that entities are sustainable into the future. That is an aspect that we are being pushed by our governance structure to focus on. And beyond that, of course, is the S, the social aspects, again, which also, if properly attended to, will also deal with the issues of transformation. Because when you talk about social, you're talking about to what extent are we saving the purposes of society? Yes, we need to generate the return, but how are we dealing with the challenges of society while we're generating the return? How do we use the opportunities that are created by the social needs out there to be able to meet the requirements of making a return? And again, that nicely fits into the question that you asked, Chair, around how are we responding to the government's call to invest in infrastructure? Because a lot of the issues that we would like to address in society is addressing those infrastructure needs, be it housing, be it water, be it energy, be it transportation, be it logistics, whatever that might be, that actually serves that purpose. So driving that ESG message that William has been speaking about is part of actually looking at transformation in its broader context. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Babudlang.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a roller coaster. We tend to shoot from the hip. So what we've learned recently is that things aren't as what they seem to be. We need to be honest. If you engage, the market is very small. I mean, the retirement industry is very small in terms of the professionals. We all know each other. And when we engage and ask them, why did you leave a certain firm? And then they'll tell you what's actually happening. You look at a level 1 GLE, so it's a generic large enterprise, and you look at the executives. The executives are mostly white males, and we don't have a lot of females and no black person in sight. So we could, it's been 20 odd years, more than 20 years. We could still be saying the same thing 10 years from now. But I think as asset owners, apart from setting targets, we need to be very explicit and say, well, okay, there's a target, fine, you don't meet it. What are the repercussions for not meeting the target? One of the discussions that we've had was that, we will run a two-prong approach. Basically, we review, we monitor, we assess, and if you still found lagging, we are looking for a replacement at the same time. So that's a conversation that's been had. So you want to basically send a shockwave to the system and say, well, these guys are actually serious about transformation. It can't be that every time we're sitting and saying, yeah, we can't retain, when they say black people, we can't retain them because, the banks pay better. So that there's a notion, say them, and we can't satisfy them, we can't retain, we can't keep them. So we need to take away that notion within predominantly white asset managers, or in fact, any firm. The value chain, we also speak to the value chain. It's not just asset management. It's the bulk where there's a lot of spend in asset management. But you look at your fund administrators, I mean, for large pension funds like Mamkanyis and Ubabu Jobe, there's a lot of money being generated on admin fees, because there's value add fees as well. Those are significant procurement deals. And, you need to also hold them accountable. You also need to look at the granular. You also need to monitor them continuously, the same that you are doing with asset managers. And one space that you also neglect is the stockbroking space. Stockbroking is huge, but how many black stockbrokers do you know? Yeah? How many funds can actually, if I can call Mazi this tomorrow morning, I'll speak to Sim and say, Sim or Voyo, which stockbrokers are you guys associated with? So there's a lot of spaces that play a very important, a very important procurement in the value chain that we neglect. So we need to look at this holistically, and we need to impose the transformation journey, the transformation agenda on all aspects. We're not saying, because some white firms are doing good, they are employing our black brothers, and they are promoting them, they are basically upskilling them, and they are being executives within the different firms. But then there are others that are just not willing to come to the party. They've got foundations, so it's fine, it ticks the box of being level 1. I don't think it's sufficient. We need to continuously engage with them and monitor them. That's my stance.
Okay, thank you. So I think my next question is, the FSTC is putting together a retirement scorecard, a retirement fund scorecard around transformation. In some circles, this has been called an indictment on the broader pension fund space, that they've not done enough, firstly, to transform within the funds themselves. You find certain funds have had the same board where the representation does not look like the membership, but somehow they've managed to maneuver that. we've had lack of transformation in this. What are your views on the stance that we needed to get to a point where we have a retirement scorecard, and that retirement funds in the general were not proactive in terms of moving towards transformation? And how can we, in the next phase of this journey, do things differently to ensure that 10 years down the line, we're not trying to reinvent version 3 of the scorecard to address the same issues? I think we can start with Babu Stole and then go to William and then Siskany.
Well, yeah, it's the answer is probably both simple and complicated. I always start with saying it's not for me to, well, it probably is. It's for me to tell other people what to do, but the most important thing is to start with me and say, what am I doing? Because it's very convenient to point fingers and say, well, we are here because somebody hasn't done something. Well, it can only be that we are here because collectively we haven't done something. And if we say collectively we haven't done something, we ultimately have to be pointing fingers at ourselves and say, what have we done? So before I speak theoretically, I would have to say, what does the PIC and its clients do, and what it is that they've done, and what it is that they intend to do? Because if I don't address that and I keep pointing fingers at other people, it becomes quite challenging. And again, I will start with what we have done, what we are doing, and what we will do. Again, I think on the asset management side, I indicated that we support over 50% of the current assets that are being managed by Black asset managers. But that's a fact. It can be tested. It's either true or it's not true. Now, once I've said that for the PIC, and you could say to me correctly, but given your science, you can do more, and I would accept that. And it says in terms of intention going forward, that intention to do more is there and will manifest in time. But I will then stop there and say, can all pension funds make the same statement and say the extent to which the PIC and its clients are supporting Black asset managers is proportionally what they are doing? Because again, I can't be unfair and say they should be doing equally what the PIC is doing given its size. But can they say proportionally they're doing the same? Because if the answer is yes, then we should see some change. So there will be tangible change. So that's on the one side. The same thing, and I think I'm using the example that you gave about stock brokers. The same thing. The PIC has a program to support stock brokers on the transaction side, not so much on the research. And again, we have a list of Black stock brokers that we support. Again, it's something that you can test. You shouldn't just take my word for it. So, like you said, somebody said, well, if I pick up a call and speak to so and so, what will the response be? If you have to pick up a call and speak to a significant portion of the Black stock brokers out there, you will find that if I'm not being extreme, most of their income is generated from the business they're getting from the PIC. We still use the traditional ones, but we have a specific allocation to Black stock brokers, and we'll continue to actually improve on that going forward relative to our size. So I think that to me is the important thing. It's not to talk about what other people must do, but to say what is ABSIP doing? What is the PIC doing? What is the GPF and the clients of the PIC doing? And are other pension funds, are other entities doing the same thing proportional to their size? Again, because I don't expect them to do as much as we do because we're quite big. And of course, then to put the challenge to ourselves and say, how do we continue doing this going forward? So that's on the supporting Black entrepreneurs, both in the stockbroking and the asset management side. But beyond that, of course, as William has indicated, is look to other aspects of the value chain. Well, the only challenge, of course, is that while the PIC is big, it doesn't have too many clients and service providers other than the ones that directly actually help it to manage its assets, either via asset management or stockbrokers. So our spend in terms of procurement is not equal to the AUM. The AUM is many times bigger than our procurement spend. We have a big AUM, but we're not really a big organization. And the same thing applies to our clients. So in terms of procurement, yes, we do focus on that very directly, and we do address the issues around supporting Black businesses and entrepreneurs. But the extent to which we can do it is not equal to our size, because the AUM is so much bigger. So the scope, I think it's not as much there, although we do pay attention to that. The area that I think is significant, I think I'm going to sound like a broken record, is going beyond that and looking at the entities in which we invest to drive transformation beyond simply the kind of industry that we're in, because that goes beyond simply our industry and goes to the industries that support the whole economic environment in the economy, and driving that change through board appointment, through executive management, and then hoping that they themselves, of course, live up to that. You will find that in most instances where we find challenges, I think you talk about the cappuccino effect. Normally you talk about the cappuccino effect only at the executive level. You find that also at the board level, where we will drive to say that actually the best way to transform companies is through their control and their management structures. And in most companies, that is the board. So we'll drive to transform the board. But then it's incumbent on that board to drive transformation in the organization, to make sure that the transformation happen at the executive level, the transformation happen at the staff level, the transformation happen at the procurement level, training, and all aspects that will actually support the broader infrastructure. That's, I think, is to me what's important. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Siskhanyi, on the same matter, your views?
So for me reading, to even begin to bring the scorecard to try and compel us to do the right thing is an embarrassment on its own, because then it says, what have we been doing? It's been so many years. What is happening? Why are we not able to drive these matters in the right direction? So I think I will go back to my previous input that we need to be intentional on what we are doing. We need to be intentional. Our policies must be specific. Our targets, we must set targets. And for me, when I look at targets, I'm looking at so much percentage of our assets must be invested in this space. So why are we not moving in that direction? It's been such a long time. Why don't we have so many females in the positions that are supposed to be occupying? And it's not to say that it's because they are incapable of doing what they are meant to be doing. So as the board, as the trustees of these pension funds, we need to make sure that we drive this change.
Mr. Nkuta.
Yeah, well, for the first time tonight, I'm not going to agree, no, Mam Khanye, I'm sorry. Obviously, we come from different dimensions and different types of boards, different demographics, different challenges. We just 7 billion, you way more than that. So please bear with me. And I will basically justify what I'm just saying. For me, it was welcomed, you know, because it triggered and started a lot of conversations that were, we had those conversations, but we didn't document them, you know. We started looking at our service providers. We started being serious about our procurement policy. We started being very active in engaging our service providers and saying, well, you know, it affects our scorecard. So if you don't shape up, it affects our scorecard. So it had an unintended ripple effect, and it's working. So with them having to give us numbers that affect our scorecard, then they should improve their transformation policies and their BE ratings. Also, what happens is that the diversification with the board improved. You know, if there's a vacancy and we're looking for an employer trustee, you know, you were looking at like, okay, we need an African male because we're lacking. So it kind of like has boards having their own EE targets as a board over and above the elections, that you can't control that. But when it comes to employer trustees, you can control who is appointed to the board. Another thing that has happened is that we did our investment consultant is doing a survey on our managers. And the GLE managers, just some of them don't want to provide us with the salary gaps between professionals. So that has an impact. So when we sit and say, well, you know, these guys are underperforming, one, they don't want to give us salary information in terms of the payment gaps between white and black professionals. You know, it's not in a good state not to disclose certain information like this. So you start asking the question of what are they hiding? You see, so over and above not being transformative in their approach and improving Black people within the organization, there's also payment gap issues. And those are the things that this scorecard has helped us with, and we're interrogating the situations very seriously.
Okay. I think my next question will be, one sentiment that has also been expressed is that incubation programs are where Black managers go to die. We emerge, we start a business, we get put into an incubator program, and there's no end in sight of that incubation. I once went to a forum where I was shocked to find an 18-year-old business with assets of over 32 billion being called an incubation manager and put on a panel for incubation. And the indictment was that most retirement funds don't have graduation processes for how to graduate the managers out of that space of incubation into mainstream. And then the second one was that every time someone tries to do something innovative in the form of, let's say, for example, myself, I decided to do alpha transport products and went into the derivative space, and I did that. Even though I have done this for the last 27 years at Standard Bank, when I step out, in my first year, I am deemed to have no track record, and I only qualify for incubators after 3 years. So the two questions that I'm posing are, one, do you not think that the criteria for entering the incubators is too stringent? And then two, do you not think that there should be a criteria that determines when one can exit incubation into the mainstream? Maybe by way of order, if I can start with Siskhanyi, then William, and then Ubabu Jobe.
Absolutely. And you can't have someone in incubation forever, someone still being called a small business for over so many years. I think that the issue of setting up a criteria will assist, and also when allocations are done, you know where you need to start. For example, new ones that are coming into the market, and you know what you are expecting to get from those incubation programs. But even if it goes according to a number of years, if you've been in a program for so many years, can it then move and you stop competing with those that are being groomed into the space? And that will absolutely assist. And we find that now, 25 years, 27 years, some are still called new or emerging service providers, if I can put it that way. But for how long, as you've put it, how long someone falls within this category of an emerging service provider? So if we can have processes or criterias where people graduate, really, the organization graduates to the new space.
Mr. Nkuta?
I've never been a fan of incubation at all. I believe people should just be appointed on merit. I once sat through a very painful interview, and it was a review of Black managers. And somebody just said, well, there's no track record here. There's no one that you can appoint here. They won't meet our targets. And it was a painful because we're looking at Black managers. So my personal view is that incubations are just a delayed tactic of allocation. You can't, I mean, it's like having a newborn baby and you expect them to be in their infancy for more than 5 years. They have to start walking in year 3 or year 2. So I've never been, for a lack of a better analogy, but yeah, I've never been a fan of incubation. And if you want to allocate directly. Don't have a part where you place managers based on their track record or based on them being Black and say, well, we'll give you 100 each. Let's see what you can do with this 100. Maybe we don't have the size, the AUM to do that, but funds that can. If it works for them, good, kudos to them. But I don't like incubation at all.
Babu Joe.
I'm going to take a slightly contrary view because I mean we have a history of supporting emerging Black asset managers. You asked 2 questions. I think the one was around incubation and graduation of the incubated, so-called incubated entities. I appreciate the sentiment that I think has been expressed about the challenges of incubation. And I'll come back to it. And then you asked the second question about what constitutes experience. You could ask the same question and say what constitutes track record. So I just want to separate those. We have supported new Black asset managers who, yes, they might have had experience of operating in an environment, in a traditional environment, and they want to actually go and set themselves up as their own company, and we actually have supported those. And when we talk about incubation, normally those are the kind of people that we support, and we allocate them mandates, and then we monitor their performance over a period of time. If they do well, we augment their mandate to a certain point, and then if they don't do well, we have sometimes the pain of having to say, well, you had 5 years to make this work. It hasn't served you, it hasn't served us. And we need to accept that the assets that we are managing are not donations. They're not assets that somebody must use to do what they want, and there's no benefit for the owners of those assets. So it does matter that the people that get given the mandates actually do perform and give the returns that are required. Doesn't mean that, of course, that you expect them to be performing at all time. You give them time to ride the cycles. When they do not do bad, you still support them. But if it becomes a perennial thing that they end up underperforming, and the underperformance translates to losses for beneficiaries of pension funds, that can be sustained in the name of saying we're supporting Black entrepreneurs. It just can't, because those are real losses that people are suffering. Our experience that we've supported people, and they do graduate. We get to a point where we support them even more, and then sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work, and we have to pull back. But that's a dynamic process. It's something that you actually manage as you are going on. What that speaks to is the flip side of incubation. If you think about incubation as supporting emerging entities that haven't got the experience and track record, to what extent do they actually build a diversified business? If yes, they perform for 5 years, 10 years, 18 years, as the number has been indicated, but the only client that they actually have is the PIC, and they expect the PIC to keep on increasing their exposure. Well, that can happen, but that's a tough sell, because you might be saying that I'm a good asset manager, I'm performing, but you're not running a good business, because you're only looking to one client or a very small group of clients to actually keep on supporting you. So part of graduation, if you want, has to do with the maturity of the business, both in terms of how well they've done in the past, but also how well they've grown their business. Because the more they actually grow their business, the more it actually makes sure that they have a sustainable business that's not reliant on one big brother or sister to support them into the future. So the ability to build a diversified, sustainable business becomes very, very important, because then it allows them to become even bigger than they are. And it can be done. Other people have done it. So it's not that it can be done. There are people who have started some small asset managers and grown those to 100 billion, if not more. So it can be done. And I think it's about making sure that you're not reliant on a single client, and you actually build I'm repeating now, diversified business. So it is both about what do pension funds do on the one side, but what do the companies themselves that are being supported, incubated, promoted, graduated, whatever you want to call it, what do they themselves do for their businesses? Because it can't just be that pension funds must be shelling out support and getting nothing in return, because that actually translates to losses for the clients and the beneficiaries of those clients on the one hand. Then you spoke about the issue about experience. I think, I mean, the fact that we do have managers that have left asset managers and they've been supported does speak to that people do get given a chance. If you've done a certain kind of work in a particular established entity and you set yourself up appropriately, people do get supported. Not everybody maybe, because again, depends on the case that you make. People do get supported, and we mustn't forget to acknowledge that fact. But what you're saying is also quite fundamental. So where do you make this distinction between experience for people coming out and wanting to set themselves up? If you go back to what I call first principles, not everybody that has worked as an asset manager can run an asset management business. And if we think that's not true, I think we are going the wrong way. So simply because you've been able to do certain things and even excelled at it within a particular structure environment that supported you, for some, yes, they can go out, and it has happened in the past and will continue to happen, that they can then go out, use that to set themselves up and succeed. But it's also very true that some of us like to work in structures that exist and can excel in those structures. So you can't simply say, because I had the experience working for company X, it means that I can go and set my own company Y, and that automatically means I'll be just as good as I was in that sheltered environment of company X. So experience, unfortunately, matters in that sense, but sometimes it doesn't matter, because you might just find that, yeah, you were good as a star asset manager in that particular environment. When you set yourself up, you will fail. That's the nature of the game. Thanks, Jay.
Thank you, Mr. I think to then go to some of the questions that are being asked by delegates and participants. I'll just paraphrase. You know, one of the things that Mr. Tabukojan said at our last engagement was that one of the reasons why it has been difficult, or it will remain difficult for certain firms to transform, is that the SA economy has not been growing. And taking from the questions that are put up by attendees, to what extent are pension funds now, well, I think, let me phrase it differently. There was an assertion that there are not enough investable projects, but SAFCA records that there are 183 alternative investment managers. If, let's say, each of them raised 500 million, it means there's 90 billion worth of projects, but the investment universe within the private equity space is not even capitalized beyond 130 odd billion. If each one raised a billion, it means they are assuming that there's 183 billion at least worth of investable projects. The second one is South Africa is a predominantly SME economy. And yet the most substantial investors in the country are not investing in venture capital or SME investing to the extent that we would have anticipated if we were really trying to stimulate the economy. Thirdly, the township economy, the extent of cash and available in the economy was so great that it shocked FNB in a study where they actually put it in the newspaper that we are shook. And yet we don't see that translating as well into substantial investment in the township, and investment into private equity, investment into venture capital, investment into township economies remains a conversation. What are the impediments that are hindering a UCT retirement fund from working with managers to create products to change Khayelitsha and Langa, that are preventing KZN Municipal from working with investment managers to change Ispingo and Adams, and GPF from changing the world because of its magnitude? That is my question. And I think by order, let's start with Mr. Nkuta, then Babu Chobe, and then Usiskai.
It's very difficult to answer this question without mentioning projects that are available or asset managers that are in that space and have been doing very well in terms of their impact investing. The irony is that you mentioned Elanga, and there's taxi violence happening now in Khayelitsha. So, you know, the security issues that come with those kind of investments. So you want to invest in a Kasi location, but the politics there is very difficult. So taxi industry and the uncertainties that may happen there, you know, your investment is basically, you need to have a secure location if you're going to set up. But be as it may, I know that there's a lot of mechanisms or asset managers that give us access to those kind of investments. There's one that we are in an infrastructure and development fund by Future Growth, for instance, you know, whereby it's not just looking at your turbines, but they're also looking at township type of investments. There's a lot of investments that are done via education schemes. So those are the ones that we are playing in, and it has an impact on the fund, because when we measure impact and saying, what are we doing as an SRI that is impactful? That's one of the funds that we mentioned. So that's what the UCTLF is doing, and it's not just limited to this, because as we mentioned when we started the conversation about Bob Jobe mentioning infrastructure and what happened with COVID is that the innovation that's going to be triggered by COVID, and what happened with the recent looting is that now we need to be innovative in our investments. So playing in the alternative space will also give us an opportunity to invest more in our Kasi economy.
Babu Jobe.
You raised three things. So the issue around the economy and where it's at is it's a real thing. I mean, at the beginning you talked about unrest and what might be contributing it, and there could be a lot of factors, but it is a fact that currently, I mean, after many years of employment hovering between 25 and 27, which is a significant unemployment in its own right, structurally been around for 30, 40 years and worsening. Currently, officially, in the 32.5% officially, but actually we know that actually the real number is probably closer to 50%. So if you talk about where is our economy is actually struggling. I mean, when you talk about unemployment close to 50%, the impact of that is significant. Why? Because given that China has taken all the manufacturing capabilities by and large, which used to make our economy, whether it's in textiles or in manufactured goods, and again, it's not unique to South Africa, but it's had South Africa quite hard. The reality is that our economy has not been creating new opportunities across the board. So I think the speaker that you mentioned was quite correct, that we're having a challenge as a country in a sense that we're trying to transform, to share, to distribute a cake which is stagnant if not shrinking. So that I think fundamentally is the truth. And the manifestations of that is, for instance, unemployment and the consequences of unemployment in terms of creating of poverty and the response of poverty possibly being the kind of unrest that we have seen. But of course, you can't use that as an excuse for not transforming. We still have to transform given that constraint, regardless. So I think that shouldn't be used as a justification for not transforming. We still need to transform the economy with that challenge of environment that is shrinking. Now, I've spoken about consumption. I think this is quite important. So, and I think it relates to your third point around the township economy. The interesting thing about that finding by FNB is that what it says is that there's a lot of money in township. Translated, there's a lot of money in the Black community. So you don't need pension funds coming in with the money. The money is already there. The question is, what is that money doing? And what are we doing with it? And I think that speaks again to our consumption products. And I know I'm going to say something that some people might say is just nationalism. But the reality is our consumption patterns as South Africans, and you can say as Black people in townships, do not support our own growth aspirations. So that money in townships is not serving the purposes of the township itself. It's either going out to the urban areas. Somebody asked earlier on about us investing in properties only in urban areas, which we don't do. We actually go even beyond that, and we've had some of those burnt in the last unrest. But the challenge is that we are not supporting our own economies. I mean, if you use an example, how many of us are wearing clothes that's made in South Africa as we speak? How many of us drive cars that are, if not made in South Africa, were assembled in South Africa? We buy Italian clothes, we buy German clothes, we eat French cuisine, and we are surprised that those economies are as strong as they are, because that's where our money is going. So that township assets that actually is already there, doesn't require pension funds, it's not being spent to actually generate economic activity within the township, for instance, through consumption. It's being spent in Germany, in France, in Italy, and in China. So one of the first fundamental questions that's more difficult is how do we ourselves make sure that our money is working for us? Which doctor does ABSIP use? Do you think ABSIP is using a doctor called Mhlongo? No, he's not. He's using Van der Merwe. Which hospital do you think ABSIP goes to? Do you think he goes to Lesedi Clinic? No, he doesn't go to Lesedi Clinic. He goes to Kloof Medical Hospital. Where are we spending our money? That's the fundamental question. And that's where your third point then comes into play, because if you do that, that's where your SMEs then get supported. So when I knock somebody's car off, do I go to my mechanic in Chawelo or to fix my car? Where do I go to get my tiler, to get my electrician? Whether I'm living in Mendon or whatever, do I use Black service providers, the SMEs that are actually, because again, we talk about these things in theory, but we don't actually understand what it is. The reality is, how do we spend our money? Whether it's for services or products, do we get those from Black service providers, those SMEs? And then lastly, when we do use them, do they give us quality products and quality services? Because that's the flip side of that. If I use plumber Sithole, do I get the same quality of service in plumbing as I get from Van der Merwe and company? When I get an electrician, do I get, because that's the flip side. Are we as Black service providers and Black businesses giving the same kind of service and products that people are getting elsewhere? Because if we're not, they won't come to us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Sis Kanye?
Mabusela, that was very interesting, and really it is true what you've mentioned. Who is my doctor? Who is, my panel beater? And that is so true. But I think also it is important that who we partner with to make sure that we grow the township economy. we need to have partners that are going to ensure that the kind of service or customer service, if I can put it that way, allows us to go back there and get the service over and over again. And if the customer service is not at the level that we expect, or is not at the level that is going to drive you to go back, you will not go back, obviously. But there are a lot of interesting projects that are happening in the township space. And it is, as I'm saying, it is important to know or have the best partners to partner with and invest responsibly. And I think it was William also who mentioned the issue of we just do not have money to give away. Our money is here to make more money for our members. However, it is important for us to invest responsibly and also partner with the right people. As the fund, as the KZN Municipal Pension Fund, we really commend those people that are working in that space, and we will partner with people that meet our requirements. Is the job creation? How are the ESG issues? And how is the profitability? And profitability, which is the main issue that we need to ensure that we get value for money. And on any service at all, you want to get value for money, because you are not going to go back if you are not getting the best value. Thank you, Chair.
So clearly we need to go back to eating amagunya and leave croissant and stimulate the economy.
That's correct.
But we are still curious as to what is white polony, what is white liver actually. We are still investigating that one. But as we close, I would like to pose one question. In summary, if you could give advice to ABSIP on what we need to be doing from today going forward to assist pension funds to drive transformation, one, and to drive transformation in the main, what are the 2 points that you'd give us, one on each end? And I think in closing, let me start with Siskhanyi, and then Babu Jobe, and then we'll close with Udlang. Yeah, age before beauty.
So Langa, I believe that as the professional body, these conversations are important. These conversations are assisting us and everyone out there to get talking. We need to be talking to make things happen, and not just talk without the action. So the action part rests with us really to make sure that we partner and we ensure that we get things working. And this series of sessions that you are having, I know that the Asset Owners Forum, it's one of the forums that you guys are driving, and it will be interesting to get into those conversations and see what other asset owners within the space are doing to ensure that they bring transformation, and all of us can learn from each other. So I'm looking forward to those conversations and see what can we learn from our peers, which we can adopt and work in our space. Thank you.
My expectation, or what I think that the ABSIP could be doing, and I think it's probably broader than just ABSIP, I talk about us more specifically. I think we need to hold ourselves accountable. I think we take comfort in the sense of being powerless. And the interesting thing about power, of course, is that nobody ever gives power to you. Power is taken. Power is self-generated. And I think we need to take ownership of what it is that we should be doing, because we actually, all of us are powerful in our own spaces, not to the same degree, not to the same extent, but all of us have a certain level of agency wherever we are. And we need to exercise that agency and hold ourselves accountable for that, because it's very easy to point fingers at other people who are not doing certain things and forgetting that we ourselves can do certain things because we are in the positions, in the environments where we are, where we can make change. So holding ourselves, or in the sense of ABSIP, holding itself and its membership to account, to say that wherever you are, yes, you might not be the CEO, you might not have billions like the PIC has, but you have certain things that you can do to serve the people around you and the environment that you are in. So that's the first one that I would share. And I think you asked us the issue about the scorecard. I think the more, I mean, there's a saying, what gets measured gets done. And I think I didn't dwell on that whole issue about why the scorecard is important, because people saying to what extent it's going to make a difference. But it is a measurement tool that always tells us that we haven't achieved what we set out to achieve, and therefore there's still more to do to achieve. It's that constant reminder that I think is important. So to be working towards those measurements across the whole spectrum of things, whether it's making sure there's sufficient deployment of women in boards, in executives, whether there's enough deployment of blacks, just those kind of matrices. So defining the matrices and making sure that we are able to measure and keep ourselves honest in terms of the progress that we're making is what I would also indicate needs to be focused on. Thanks, Chair.
Last but not least, I think, you know, we need to, I personally feel that the institutional market has assisted building big brands, which are predominantly being your Ellen Gray, Coronation, and 91. And it should do the same for reputable Black managers. So that's historic. And I think with the likes of ABSIP and these kind of engagements, collaboration is key in driving the transformation agenda. You know, I always saw ABSIP from a distance, you know, but now I understand. I think the new leadership has been very, very engaging. They've let themselves known out there. And, you know, with Polo and Langa at the helm, they've done very well in engaging us in having these conversations. I've attended most of the series in terms of transformation, and I've been really engaged. And you know, so for me, I can't just sit in my little corner anymore and saying, well, transformation isn't working. I can sit in that boardroom, I can attend these meetings, however, it doesn't have impact. But if I share the experiences that I've had, and also take from the likes of Mam Kani, Obab Stole, I can go back and with being equipped. And I know that other attendees will also gain a lot of knowledge and what clients are thinking, because I'm sure there's a lot of asset managers, whether Black or white, that are in attendance and seeing what clients are looking at and how they can have a positive impact within their transformation journey in their firms. So please continue, don't be disheartened. Hopefully in the next engagement, we will have positive feedback. And I think you should also try and survey funds. You know, I'm just gonna talk from a retirement fund point of view. So you survey us from a service provider point of view. What are we doing as the FSTC? You know, you look at what our transformation journey is like. What are the demographics of the boards at large? So you look at age, because I think age is very important, because what was effective 20 years ago doesn't apply to me as a member. You know, I've got 28 years to retirement. So we need different investment strategies, which didn't work, which won't work for me now as opposed to our elder counterparts. So I think that continuous engagement is key. Yeah, thank you.
Babu Jobe, Siskani, Willis, thank you so much for making yourselves available for today's session. Thank you for the robust discussion and your input into the conversations around transformation in the in the financial services sector, and particularly into the pension fund space and into the broader economy, which is generally underpinned by the work that we're able to do in financial services. To all the delegates and attendees of today's session, thank you for making time. One of the initiatives that we'll be running this coming weekend is ABSIP. On Saturday, we'll be hosting an imbizo on the township economy. We invite you all to join us. Links have been forwarded for registration. Please kindly sign up and let's have a conversation on how we can turn what has just happened into the next success story of the South African Rainbow Nation Renaissance. Thank you so much to everyone. Babu Stole will be sending an invoice for PIC's corporate membership. Thank you very much. And see you everyone at the next session of ABSIP.
Thank you. Thank you very much, colleagues. Thanks. Thanks. Have a good evening. Bye.
Bye.